Okay, welcome everyone. I am Diana from Hawthorne Union, and so thankful to have a panel of coaches here today to share insight on the ICF, so International Coaching Federation Coach Knowledge Assessment. So, as many of you know, if you're pursuing ICF credentialing, or for those of you new to the process, the Coach Knowledge Assessment has changed recently. So, we have a number of coaches here who have passed. Congratulations. And so now the ACCs and PCCs in front of you are going to share some of their insights. So thank you all for joining us and for your time. So we'll kick it off with Sonny. And the question for the panel is, what helped you prepare for the CKA?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing for me was I live in a mindset of memorize, internalize, personalize. So it's very difficult to personalize anything if you don't yet know it. So I went through a series of printing off all of the different components, everything from ethical practice, maintaining agreements, all the way down through. And then once I printed that list off, I actually took the time to go through and highlight and underline all of the things that meant something to me, that felt powerful and emotional to me in the language that's inside of the ICF document. Once I did that, I actually recorded my voice on a voice memo, speaking out loud in my own language with emphasis on the words that made sense to me or that were impactful to me, each of those different components. So I have like a 2-minute voice memo for each of the different components that are tested on, listening to my own voice. So after going through 3 steps, read it. Second, highlight the things that stood out. Third, recorded my voice in each of the different components so that I could hear myself speaking those things. And then the real actual studying was literally listening to my voice, because that was that piece of actually making it come to life for me, which was extremely helpful because there were multiple times that I was sitting at that test, remembering hearing my voice saying specific words. And those words are in the questions. I promise you those words are in the questions. And so that became a very powerful piece for me.
Thank you, Sonny. How about for you, Nnenna?
Yeah, thank you for that, Sonny. It's so nice to hear how other people approach this, and there's no wrong way, right? I think it's for me, it was really helpful just to sit with the approach of the ICF to the updated competencies. And so what I did to do that was look at the video series that the ICF did, and just kind of sit with listening to the different mentor coaches and people who recorded that, what sort of get in the minds of the people that designed the test. I'm not somebody who throughout life has been the best test taker. And so I wanted to sort of get in the minds of the designers and then pair that with my own experience of, practice as a coach and the competencies they were testing me on, times where going through each of the competencies where I've experienced related situations, and most importantly sort of thinking about the breakdown of like the competencies that were about my being as a coach versus my doing as a coach as they split it up, and sort of figuring out based on the test experience when I was given scenarios, if it is it in that be part or is it in that do part, and then sort of helping me from there narrow down. So those were a couple things that helped me with that. And then the ethics part, similarly, just really like going through the definitions and getting in touch with what the intention of the definition was versus the literal definition, and getting in touch with the intention and how that might align or not align with my experience.
Thank you. It's so interesting. You both went so whole person on it. So, I mean, which is what we're looking for in coaching and as coaching. So it's helpful to hear different methods. Patty, anything you'd like to share on this and how you prepared?
Similar to Nnenna, I looked at all the YouTube videos with the core competencies and the ethics and went through all of researching and or listening to all that. But I also used a workshop by Lissa DeHart, which was so helpful. She does it live, and then she also sells the recording of the workshop. But she takes you through questions, and then it's discussion between the group about how they interpret the questions and why this might be the best answer and this may be the worst answer. And so there was just a lot of insight from the group on how they perceive those questions that really helped me. And she gives a lot of great tools. She gives some little acronyms on how to remember certain things and how to set your right mindset when you're going into it, and just answering the questions the way that the core competencies and ethics intends you to do the work. So she gave a lot of great tips on that, and it was really helpful for me. Someone who has not taken an exam in forever, who is going into this going, oh my God, an exam, all that high school anxiety coming back. She really helped me craft the right mindset to go into this, and give me some tools just to help me kind of be settled in it.
Great. Thanks, Patty. Raphael, how about you?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I think, yeah, I agree with what a lot of the other panelists said. I think for me, the acronyms that I was able to practice, a lot of them came from the Heart YouTube and training video. You don't need to do the paid version, but I mean, you probably should. But if you kind of have to do it, I didn't pay for it. I kind of studied, kind of crammed for the test last 2 days before the test, and did great. So it's possible to do it without that, but you'll probably feel more comfortable if you actually take the test. So do that, review the competencies, do the practice test. There's several tests out there that you can do and test for. Make sure, I think you also, just some practical tips also is, I would recommend doing it in the test facility, right? Because if you do it at home, there's all these monitoring things that you have to kind of factor in, and people might be distracting you. Like the FedEx person comes in while you're doing the test, they'll take you out of things. Have earplugs. The facilities do provide them sometimes, but it's actually good to just have that. Read the question twice before you answer it. I know that obviously the format, I don't know if we talked about this already, but it's like, it's a kind of a combo questions, right? Each question is like you have the best option and the worst option. So you're essentially triangulating on those two. And then there's two other ones that are going to be kind of in between. The test is pretty subtle. If you don't study for it, you will flunk it. Like I can guarantee you, even if you have a lot of experience, because it's meant to be a little tricky. And that's why those acronyms really help. I actually did some exercises and for myself to remember those, and that really was the thing that helped me the most. And then obviously going through the core competency as well. You need to get 76% on the test, not 70% like the old test. So that's really important to know. Bring warm clothing. You see this jacket? You cannot bring this type of jacket because it makes noise. So you have to bring a hoodie that's like a cotton hoodie to keep yourself warm and just regulate your temperature while you're doing it. And the test is 3 hours. You only have like an optional break in the middle, which I think I would encourage you to take it. But it is very much taxing in terms of your endurance and your mental focus. I know that I am like at this point, my mind is mush because I'm looking at like YouTube shorts and all this. So your attention span is not what it used to be even a couple of years ago. So it's good to practice a long form test practice because that will help you then when you actually have to do it for real. Manage your time, answer all the questions. Don't focus on anything that, in other words, like if you're unsure about something, just make a choice on it, complete it, flag it if it's not, if you're unsure, and then come back to it. But fill it out, because if you don't fill it out, you get 0 credit. So, whereas otherwise you can get partial credit. And then get some sleep before the evening. Get there early, at least I would say 45 minutes early or an hour. And yeah, you'll do great. So.
Thank you, Raphael. Appreciate it. Miki, I know that was a lot of tips. Any additions from your perspective?
It's interesting. I feel like I'm a bit of a combination of everybody. Sonny, I didn't go into the depth that you did, but I did not pay to go to a session, but I did attend some session that was an advertised session, and the acronyms that they gave and sort of like really digging into the questions I found really helpful. I think the main thing for me was really pay attention to the words. So every word in there, it's like, don't think it's just random. And I went back and looked at my notes because I took the test more than 6 months ago. And I think that, can I share one of the acronyms that I thought was very helpful?
Please do.
Okay, so this was that the A stands for asking versus telling. So really pay attention to that. C, client-centered versus client-directed. Another C is curiosity versus leading. And then an A for awareness of judgments and biases. And T about transparency. So it's ACCAT. And I memorized that. So when I went through the questions afterwards in the exam, it was like a highlight for me. Okay, what in here? Because I found it, honestly, I found it difficult. Like, I could tell you what I thought the best answer, and then between the words, trying to understand which one is worse than this. It's like, I found it frustrating. So, but this really helped me to sort of like, I put down best, client-centered, curiosity, transparency. The coach is self-aware. And then the worst, when it was coach-centered and directed, it's leading, it's not transparent, it's telling, the unconscious biases are coming through. And that really helped me in the exam. And other words to pay attention for is, again, acknowledge, share, ask, do, say. So just really pay attention to those things, because it sort of repeats itself in the questions. And I found that really helped me sort of quickly eliminate certain questions.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Just with the show of hands, so I kind of understand, it sounds like Raphael took it in person. Did anyone else take it in person? Okay, so Raphael and Sonny took it in person, and then Patty, Nnenna, and Miki took it online. So Sonny, kicking it over to you. Anything else? Any other kind of in-person tips, or any other insights you want to share about either what was challenging or recommendations that you have?
Yeah, a few things. So I do think when you do go into a testing center, they do give you a kind of a little whiteboard with a marker that you can write some things, or a piece of paper and a pen that you're allowed to write some things. So I went straight in, and the first thing I did, if you've got an acronym or if you've got other things, write them down immediately. Put them on a piece of paper in front of you so you see them at all times. At the top of my paper, the one thing that embodies everything for me is my belief that the client is capable. So I wrote, believe in the client. That literally was in the top of my thing, believe in the client. So it's kind of my true north of, the client is capable. The client is capable. It's not based on what I know. The client is capable. So a lot of that helped me shape just putting myself in the mindset of the client. Now, a couple other things. I'm an internal coach. So I also put a reminder on that to step out of being an internal coach and imagine a world that I have my own coaching practice. Because what I found to be true when I was taking some of the practice exams was that I was shaping it through relationships I had internally with people I've had a relationship with for 10 years. And the ICF would tell you to respond a different way than potentially you might with somebody that, this might sound crazy, but I get to coach some of my closest friends in life. And some of those friends, as a joke, I might say at certain times, dude, you're lying right now. That's not true. Like, I might say that to a friend. I wouldn't say that to a client if I were running my own practice. So I had to get myself out of the mindset of having an internal coaching relationship with people I've had for a decade that I live life with outside of work. And that was an important distinction for me as it relates to answering a lot of those questions. The other thing I would say is it was really important for me to stay present. And what I mean by that is, because you have to answer the best and the worst on every one of the questions, there were times, and you will experience it too when you take it, there were times that you would say, like, I'm not entirely sure what the best one is, because kind of I could argue for all four of them. So if you think that way, then it's like, well, how am I going to pick the worst one if I could argue all four of them are the best? Like, there's some fighting of that happened in your mind. And what I found as I got about 20 or 30 questions in was the importance of just staying present on the one. Don't worry about how you felt and there you had some anxiety on one or the other. Just stay present, continue to focus on what it is that the client needs from you in the moment. And that was kind of my true north. So just a few things for me that were a little different based on being an internal coach and some of the stuff I battled with.
Thank you, Sonny. So appreciate you joining us today.
You're welcome. I wish I could stay. I'd love to hear everyone else. I do
It's
have
okay.
to
We're recording. We'll send it your way.
So, pleasure to meet everyone. Yep.
Great. So I'll hand it over to Nnenna. So it's helpful to hear. So we heard from Raphael tips and Sonny tips for in person. Nnenna, for you, when you think about kind of switching over to the online, and then also just for the sake of time, any particular challenges or insights that you'd like to share?
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to co-sign what Sonny said about mindfulness and being present. I mean, just even doing a brief mindfulness exercise before I started the exam was helpful because it is really about that. You know, there's a tendency sometimes for some of us to sort of be looking at things right up to the exam. And so, yeah, I really wanted to emphasize that. The other thing is, you know, just thinking about online, there is an amount of privilege to recognize here. You know, if there are uncertain elements in your environment, if people might burst in at the last moment, etc. I definitely agree with Raphael that, you know, it's better to do it in person. I was able to go to sort of a removed guest room where I was staying and have noise canceling headphones. And then between those two things, I was able to do it online comfortably. But it was pretty jarring to think about, oh my gosh, like if anything happens, if there's any noise at all, if there's any like that they might cancel this thing. And so you definitely need to be in a situation where you feel comfortable, you can isolate yourself enough where you won't have any noise like apart from yourself. But apart from that, like once I got it online, I found it very straightforward. I thought actually somebody was going to come on, like the video of somebody or the voice of somebody, because I've taken, you know, a GRE before where that happened online. But nobody came in. Maybe they just saw me and saw everything was all good, and so they didn't feel like their voice or photo needed to come on. But they basically, you know, and maybe also they had a lot of people in queue, to be honest. But I saw you know, it seemed like somebody was assessing and then they let me in the test. So I might have gotten lucky that it was a busy queue that day. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. If you have taken another test online before, you'll find it very similar. And if you have not, it's really just follow the prompts. It's pretty straightforward and you go pretty quickly into the test. In terms of the challenges, I did also find that like distinguishing between like the worst and what's more bad than that was quite tricky. There's particularly subtleties, and I found particularly you know, isolating between which one was not good, which one was worse than that one was sometimes tricky. But again, going back into thinking about the competencies and thinking about, like Sonny said, putting the client first, believing the client is critical. One brief caveat that I remember that still stays with me though is there are times in which, for example, thinking about benefiting the client, that could be done offline, right? So like, for instance, following up with a resource, one might think, oh, if you give the client a resource, that's not believing in them. Like that's let them find it on their own. But we know as coaches, right, that if there's an area where the person needs support, we might follow up outside of the coaching session, right, to provide a resource. So I would just be careful and not thinking too rigidly, right, that in terms of some of the competencies, that it's about supporting the learning journey of the client as well, even if it's not in the particular session, the live session, right? And the last thing is just, I wish I knew sort of before taking an exam, not to focus anytime on like definition, memorizing definitions, right? I didn't memorize too much of that, but I did think I would get a question like, okay, this is the scenario. What is the answer? Is it demonstrating ethical practice? Is it this? Is it that? And it wasn't like multiple choice like that. It was really scenario based for the entire exam.
Great, thank you. Okay, Nnenna, I know you'll need to go, but if there's anything else before you go and you want to hop in, please jump in before you leave. Thank you for your insight. Patty, taking it online, how about for you? Anything in particular that you would recommend?
Well, first I echo everything Nnenna said. Yeah. But one of the challenges I had was with their mobile app. When you first go in there, you have to provide them a copy of an ID and a picture of you and a picture of your environment. And their mobile app was really buggy for me, which caused me a lot of stress. It's like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I'm not going to get in here in time. So just give yourself plenty of time to do the initial stuff ahead of time. I thought I had, but it was just really buggy for me. And so I ended up doing it off of my computer camera, and that worked immediately. So I just didn't even deal with the mobile app after that. So just make sure you give yourself time so that you go into relaxed. I went into a little bit stressed out. Sonny had mentioned that they give you a whiteboard when you go into the facility. They actually give you a virtual whiteboard that you can also put notes on. If you give yourself time, you can go on there and put some notes on just to remember your acronyms or whatever tools that you work for you. A really great tip that I got is that, manage your time. The test is, 3 hours with that 5-minute break in between, and you've got 84 questions. So it's about 2 minutes a question. So if you keep in your mind that you don't get stuck on a question, if you get stuck on a question, answer the best you can, flag it, and then move on. And I think in the first section, I probably flagged about 10 questions or so. But by keeping that time management mindset, I was able to go back and review those 10 questions and then answer them and be comfortable and in that first part of the exam pretty easily. So just time management, keep that in mind, keep yourself paced. Don't lose track of that. And then there's a clock that's counting down for you the whole time too, that you can watch. Let's see, the questions themselves, think about it being client driven when you're looking at the answers. What is the client leading? What is the client doing? And follow that kind of concept. It's, the core competencies, client driven, client centric. And that helped me a lot in answering the questions. Is like, where is the client in this answer? And then also prepping beforehand when the person comes on. I had the exact same experience as Nnenna did, is that I heard a voice and that was it. But I was able to have water on my desk. I had an allergy attack that morning. I had some tissues on my desk. I just had to show them there was no writing on the tissue, which was really funny. But just connect with that proctor and ask them, at the 5-minute break, what can I do? What can't I do? Because I've heard stories of people who got up to go to the restroom that 5-minute break and then they canceled the exam. I had no problem with it. I got up, went to the restroom. The guy didn't have any issues with it. So just make sure that, you connect and communicate with that proctor to know what their mindset is and what their role is. Yeah, and just believe in yourself. You know this stuff. Just believe in yourself when you answer these questions. Don't let all those voices come into your head or all those different stories you hear from other people. I was terrified that I wasn't going to pass this exam the first time because of all the stories that people shared with me. And I just said, it is what it is. And I just relaxed into it and believed in myself. And I will tell you, within a half an hour, they gave me my results and I had let out the biggest cheer. So just believe in yourself. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Patty. How about for you, Miki?
Mine was a bit different. So on the day I got on a little bit before and there was a really long queue. So I think I only got in about 50 minutes in and I'm one who drinks a lot. And I was worried about not going to the bathroom for all those hours. And so I only got in nearly about an hour late. Okay, so just to take that into account that can happen. And I didn't know, because at that point, it's like you're online, you're in a queue. I didn't know if I'm already, like, my camera is on, am I being watched or not? Sort of, can I go to the bathroom? I did. Nothing happened at that point. The person got on and he did want to see more photos and I had to show him everything around me. So mine seemed to be a bit more detailed. I also, I'm a slow reader. So I really had to watch the time and I flagged questions in the first part. I didn't have enough time to get back to them. In the second part, I did, but I got through all the questions. I had the very unlikely event of a power failure in the middle of the exam. Exactly, Diana. That was I want to swear what I did in the middle, because I think I was in the second half. And I'm like, I've already done so much and I didn't know what's going to happen. I didn't know how much longer it's going to go for. I did run to the bathroom while that was happening. I thought I'm going to use that opportunity. I had my headphones still connected, just, and I didn't know, I had no idea what's going to happen next. Now I connect again while there. And I think that's it. Now they're going to throw me out because they're going to see that I went to the bathroom. Nobody sees you. So if that happens just as somebody, you have to restart the whole process. And I didn't know if at that point my exam is cancelled or not. It was not. He let me continue. So just for other people, in case you lose power, I never lose power. And it happened in the middle of the exam. One thing for me, I think a little bit like Sonny, I, for many years, was an internal coach, and I also, I'm an executive coach, and people do hire me for my advice. And I felt during the exam, there were points where I'm like, what do they want to hear? It's not necessarily what I believe in. And it was really hard for me. And at one point, that self-talk was going, and then he was like, I really had to just quieten down and just concentrate on the exam and on the questions and sort of just think through that. And honestly, Diana, there's some questions, even the one Nnenna mentioned, the question about giving a resource. I think there were other questions. It's like where the client is completely stuck. Do you give advice? I still don't know what is the right answer as far as ICF is concerned. And so at the end, I felt like I was guessing. I still wasn't quite clear at what they would be looking for as an answer. Maybe it's very simple. So that would be sort of one thing for me as an area to sort of to explore more and to really understand what are the sort of the boundaries, the cross lines that they're looking for now. Is there any point that it is okay to give advice or not? And I think that from what you, Sonny shared now, and Raphael, it may be easier to just go and do the exam somewhere else. I didn't find that virtual board that you mentioned, Patty. Really good point if other people find it. And it just may sort of take out that stress. I'm not sure if you can go to the bathroom in the 5 minutes in between the two things. For me, it turned out to be a lot more stressful at home. And there is a testing center not far from here that I could have gone to.
Great insight. Thank you, Miki. Sorry for the trauma of it.
I know it's terrible.
I know people are often stressed out just about the test itself, but the added elements, I think that's also, per Raphael and Sonny's recommendation, that's a good endorsement if people have access to be able to potentially go in person.
And I'm sorry if I didn't mean to share too much information about going to the bathroom, but that for people like me who drink a lot and it ended up being more than 4 hours, that is sort of a long time to just sit here and not get out from your seat.
I think that's valuable and realistic. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think as you drink, I think that's important because this used to be a open book, unproctored exam. And so what a lot has changed, and I appreciate the rigor that has changed and part of why, and with the ICF hoping to hold the gold standard. But some of what you're talking about, I think also these are some of the challenges that hopefully they're also taking feedback on to try to make more consistent, try to make it a better experience.
Yeah. I have to drop, but I have to drop, but I just wanted to leave before I dropped positive energy to folks. And I wanted to appreciate bringing up the logistics around the camera because I did have to show my area. So if you can't be in an area, like don't be in front of a bookshelf. You really want to be in front of pretty much a blank wall. Maybe with the table there, like the table I had there, they wanted to actually see what was on the table. So just if you can't be in an area that's pretty blank, that's another vote for going inside. But I was able to do that. The other thing to leave you with is just like my personal sense is the ICF is quite conservative And so if you think about our, advice versus not advice, I would always tend towards like they don't want you to give advice at all. And the caveat would be, are you serving as a guide versus being prescriptive? And if you're serving sort of as a guide, then maybe you can tilt towards there, but definitely not advice. So yeah, pretty conservative, but at the same time, trust your gut as well.
Thank you, Nnenna.
Thanks, everybody. Great to meet you and great to see some of you again.
Thank you. So I'll just speak briefly to that. And then Raphael, if you have more insights that you want to share, you kicked us off with some great tips about taking it and warmth and all that stuff. But just before we wrap up that question, Miki, what I'll speak to briefly and see if this is helpful to what Nnenna was saying. Yes, the advice, take the advice out as much as possible. The rule on this, kind of per the mentoring perspective, is that you're allowed to make a recommendation without attachment. So it's in exams in general, we recommend that people don't make any recommendations, but then if you're able to do so without attachment. So not looking at those, not knowing what the questions were. And I'll just say for myself, I have a lot of trouble with multiple choice as a creative thinker because I can often see. So I also think as we get through this question, other tips and kind of places where you got stuck can be helpful as well to maybe explore for the people watching. So Miki, thank you for bringing those up. Raphael, any particular additional either challenges or tips that have come to mind based on what was shared?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So, yeah, I thought the panelists had some great comments. I don't know if I mentioned before, like you should definitely read the question twice. And I think that helps to settle your mind a bit and make sure you don't make silly, unforced errors. The other thing is when we talked about this acronyms, right? So the ACAT and the other part of it is the traps. So ACAT traps, it's a good way to remember it. These are inverse terms. So basically the ACAT is the best possible answers. The traps are obviously, as would indicate the acronym, the worst. So if you look at the first one, which is the A, right? Ask, acknowledge, that's the best. The worst is tell, teach. Now, if you have a question where let's say, and this is where it gets tricky and subtle, where somebody's asking a question that is not perfectly formulated and might be maybe slightly serving, so it's not so client focused. But the other option is that somebody else, the other option is like you're telling, then, but just in terms of what is the worst, the telling is the worst. So they try to make sometimes what would seem like the best answer, which start with the asking, acknowledging, like not perfectly articulated to kind of throw you off a bit. But just if you think about that as that the yin yang, right? You'll be fine. Then I think the other kind of substantive acronym advice that I would actually suggest for folks is from a different source. It's Elise Park. She's a PCC. She has a cool YouTube video, and she basically created an acronym for the 8 core competencies, and like she calls them the EMAT flag. So I think of them as the MAT's flag, but essentially kind of takes you through all of them. So that's another way for you to also remember all the 8 competencies, and then you can go more into detail for each one. But I mean, the combination of using that with the ACAT traps was really powerful, and it made me be able to really especially take out the answers that we knew were not going to be good for the test. So I definitely encourage you people to do that. And I'll just show one last thing here. So this is what I created. This is like 5 different times. So it's like the acronyms, I just wrote them down and just verbalize them and remember them, because when you're in the test, they don't give you a piece of paper. You can't just transcribe it. So you have to remember it. So that's how you do that. And lastly, I actually think that this test made me a better coach, which I think, that's probably what the ICF wants. I never feel about that way about standardized tests. in this case, I actually think that because it focused so much on the core competencies, and it made it kind of gamified it for me. I feel like I'm a better coach as a result of taking this test, which I certainly would not have expected as an outcome out of this. So, so I'm actually grateful that I took the test.
Thank you. I have so much empathy and respect and appreciation for the rigor and how much you've all gone through. So I just want to acknowledge, that you've made it through, and also you're just this. I've learned so much. This context is so valuable. This is very different. This is very different than when I took the exam. One thing that's coming up for me, so I'm just curious if this sparks any thoughts. When I took the previous CKA, I felt that there were a number of questions where it would potentially, they were worded in business coach language. So if someone was not familiar with business coaching, that might be a little bit challenging. But ultimately, the client was always the answer. Who are you listening to? The manager, the sponsor, or the client? And the client was always the answer. Did you find, were there questions or other tips where kind of the answer is never telling? The answer is always the client is responsible for the agenda. Other kind of main tips that you saw or trends that you either recall or feel that might be helpful to people watching?
I mean, I'll kind of get us started, I guess. Well, I thought the questions themselves were, I was surprised by how sophisticated the questions were, and the level of client that we were working with. So I mean, a lot of the times they were like, C-suite people, and basically like, oh, there's like somebody's like works in venture capital, and the examples were very much they were not trivial examples. They were examples really drawn from, you could tell that they were drawn from real cases, which makes it interesting. So keep that in mind, keep that richness in mind as you're going into it. So that means to me is that common sense of how you would approach it. So don't rely solely on learning these acronyms and all that, but also think about it like situationally, but still, like, don't fall into the traps of doing something that the ICF would just say, no, you almost never do that or never do that. So, but I thought that if you read the Wall Street Journal, like a lot of the stuff that you would see there would be like, yeah, like you could just see that like manifested in a question in one of these tests. So.
Thank you, Raphael. And I'll just comment on that. So my recommendation, having not taken this version of the test, is especially for coaches who are not used to working in a business setting, is to clear out that language and find, where is the client? Is there a sponsor? What are the other stakeholders? Because ultimately you need to find the client, and what the client's title is doesn't matter. So some of that is, I think, Raphael, I think that's good perspective, because I just felt like, oh, this is a lot of noise that maybe would confuse business coaches or non-business coaches. But I like your perspective looking at it as a real life scenario. But I think for coaches going in, that can be helpful to kind of isolate out, who are you coaching? Because that's who you're holding in the driver's seat and as resourceful and whole. I know this is a surprise question just based off, but Patty or Miki, any insight that you would like to share?
Honestly, I don't remember the specific questions, but I also think as a business coach, probably those things were like on the easier side for me. And I mean, I'm an executive coach in the corporate world. Then nothing stands out to me that was the sort of the difficult part for me. So sorry, no insight there.
No, that's good. That was something that I felt was perhaps biased in the previous exam, but I know that the ICF did a lot of work and revisions on the new version of it. So it's just a heads up for maybe those who aren't as comfortable in the business world. The ICF is not measuring whether or not you feel prepared to be an executive coach. It is just a way of phrasing the question. Patty, anything for you? trends?
I'm in the same boat as Miki's. I
Okay.
sort of remember the questions, and I know there was a smattering of all different types of scenario. I think there was one with some team stuff in it. There was one with sponsors. There's one with direct. I'm saying one, there was some. But I agree with you. It's, if you just think of where is the client in this, you know, the scenario doesn't matter as much, you know, the static around there doesn't really matter as much as you just focus on the client themselves.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, can I add one more thing?
Sure.
There was one question that was actually very tricky. I thought the trickiest one of all, and that had to do with a scenario where an employee gets coaching paid through the company. The company has an agenda to do, I think it's like some sort of leadership training for this individual. So that's the agreement that the coach has with the sponsor. But it turns out that the client doesn't want to work on leadership. They want to work on something else. So essentially, you already have an agreement with the sponsor, but now the client wants to work on something else. So how do you handle that? What's the best? What's the worst way? So that's a good instance of there's being a little bit of a disconnect potentially across all three parties. And you know, it had to be handled you know, in a way that was still keeping honoring the client coach relationship, but also if you have an agreement with a sponsor, you also do need to have some sort of, you know, look back to that. So, but still keeping obviously confidentiality and all these things. So it can get like, it's certainly can get to that level of complexity. So I think that's why I also recommended making sure that you really think about the core competencies as well, and not just this acronym that we talked about as well, because that I think that will help you to kind of like prioritize how you handle this potentially. So
great, thank you. Yeah, and I'll just say for coaches out there who are watching who are not working in a business context or are not used to words like sponsor, which is where someone else is paying for the coaching, or stakeholder when there are other people involved, let's say it's HR, the managers who have a desire to see a certain outcome, that may be a place where you want to do a little bit of study just so that the questions don't throw you off in the same way. And I find that coaches are very generous with their time. You can reach out, you can ask questions. Coaches that are on the executive coaching side and in business may have more trouble with the questions where they have to scrub out not giving advice and consulting, because we usually have advice and consulting in those kind of roles. So wherever you're coming from, the perspective you're coming from as a coach, those are just kind of heads up depending on your different kind of coaching. So thank you, panelists. I know I went off track on that, but I wanted to see if that was still true. And to Raphael's question, that is a kind of question that I recognize. So it's, you know, find the client. How are we following the client? As we kind of close and wrap up here, you have all shared so much. Is there anything else that comes to mind, you know, what you wish you knew before taking the assessment, or maybe any other tips that you would like to offer?
One thing about taking the exam online, it's broken into two parts, as we talked about, with a 5-minute break in between. When you flag the questions, you can only complete those flagged questions on the first section before you go to break. You don't get a chance to go at the very end. So you have this section you complete, and once it's closed that door to the break, then you move on to the second session. So something just to keep in mind there.
So helpful. Thank you. And it sounds like there's an actual flagging mechanism so that you can pull it back and look later. Okay, that's helpful. And then to Nnenna's point, is this ethics or managing, you know, facilitating client growth? There's no matching of the competencies. So I think that that's a good point, because sometimes, you know, when we think about exams in other settings, you often have to know kind of what paragraph it goes under. But to Raphael's point, it's very scenario based. It's best and worst. Take a look at the sample questions, but there's no kind of gotcha. Oh, you thought that was communicates effectively, and it was actually, you know, establishes and maintains agreements. Not that you would mix those things up. Hopefully anybody watching this video knows what those things are. But I think it's also helpful to know what we don't need to know. Thanks, Patty. Miki or Raphael, any other tips or things you wish you knew?
Honestly, for me, it was even just sort of just what happens if you do lose power, or I don't know, just things like that. And Patty, I think it was a great tip to even ask the person before, can I go to the bathroom in between? Like, what can I do in that 5 minutes, or what can I not do? I think that is like great advice. I wish I knew that before. I probably would have asked just to know like what to expect. I think the only thing that, again, I really appreciate you saying the background of the coaches, because as a business coach, I didn't have to think about the sponsor, those things. I had to think more about the advice. I wish I remembered the questions, right? Because it really was a long time ago. But I remember there were some questions that I really thought afterwards, I have to ask Diana about that. And what would be the right, just to sort of to go in sort of thinking clearer about that and what would be the expectations. Because ICF did make some changes now around, you know, from what I understood, that there are circumstances where it would be okay. I'm still not clear about those circumstances. So that was, I think, the one thing for you. And honestly, I think for me, the exam, it was frustrating. It was, I don't know if it was also the extra time that it took. I got off it and I was like, it was tiring. Do not schedule anything sort of afterwards in the day. I really thought it took a lot out of me. Just, it's full on concentration for those multiple hours. And just, it's demanding. And I think that it's demanding sort of on all different fronts, and especially with the, like, you know, the best and the worst, sort of like, then, okay, you've picked up the best, but now you may sit there and think, I think those two are just as bad. Like, what will be the worst? So it takes out of you. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Miki. Raphael, anything in closing?
Study hard. It's not, you can't really pass this test if you don't do any studying. It's because it does have a code to it. So you have to be able to crack that code. And I think we talked a lot of ways of doing that. And I'll just, I don't work for Pearson, but I will have to say the Pearson facility I went to in Culver City was amazing and so clean. It made me feel very good and comfortable being in that environment. So I mean, I would, unless there's some, you know, you're somewhere in remote area, I would just really suggest you just take the test at the facility. And that'll take a lot of the stress and distraction out. And you even in the best case scenario, I myself found myself distracted in the exam. So just know that you're not used to taking those tests like you were back in high school, like Patty said. So you know, just practice and be rested up.
Great. Thank
And
you.
you'll be great.
Yeah. And what I'll add as well is that if you don't pass, I don't know the exact details of the retaking. However, it's don't let it stop you, right? So as part of as aspiration to the MCC level, but then also at all levels, sometimes people don't pass their coaching exam and they have to resubmit calls. Sometimes people don't pass this exam and have to retake. So I think, you know, though we all have a different level of test anxiety. You know, to Patty's point, it's been a while perhaps since we've actually taken a multiple choice exam. And also know that even if you don't get a passing score, it's not going to be what stops you. It's going to be another step on your journey. And having not passed on calls before to get to the level that I wanted to get, I did learn more and I became a stronger coach for it. And I can say that now that I'm credentialed and an ICF assessor and an MCC. And so it can sound really easy, but I also know that kind of on the journey, to Raphael's point as well, is that some of that's what shapes us. But, you know, love that, you know, the panelists also wished everyone well and focused on this, but also, even if it's not your best day, you know, you try again. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you to our panelists. So appreciate your generosity and sharing your insight and helping other coaches out there. So have so much gratitude and appreciation for you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for all your help in this.